David Jones, distinguished Welsh Secretary, who I think very splendidly took a lower job as a Minister of State in the exit department, and I think he's much missed in the government and really knows how it works on the inside. David, over to you.
Thank you, Owen. One morning in the early summer of last year, I woke up in a hotel room in Bratislava. I'd spent about 6 months campaigning to leave the European Union. The country had voted to leave the European Union, and the Prime Minister, in her wisdom, had just appointed me to become a Minister of State at the Department for exiting the European Union. And I left the hotel, got into one of the fleet of BMW 7 Series that were lined up outside, and was wafted to the concert hall in Bratislava, which is where the first European Council after the Brexit vote was taking place. And I walked up the stairs and I was introduced to a very senior European Commissioner. I introduced myself, I told him my name was David Jones, extended my hand, and his reply to me was, "Hello, Mr. Jones, how long do you intend to remain shackled to this corpse?" I have to say that that was a rather disconcerting first encounter. I hadn't expected that my new colleagues in the European Union would be ecstatic at the fact that we had voted to leave. But it was not until I met this man, who was a highly educated, otherwise very civilized man, that I realized the extent to which the continuing European Union regarded the Brexit vote as an existential threat. It was something that they positively hated. And over the ensuing months, I had many meetings with EU counterparts, discussed with them the British position, made it clear that there had been a democratic vote of the British people and that the British people had decided to leave, and made it clear that we wanted a good, continuing, ongoing relationship with the European Union based upon the principles of free trade. And every single EU minister I spoke to said, yes, well, we understand that. We understand that there's been a vote. But you must understand also that in no circumstances will we allow any nation to leave and enjoy better terms outside the European Union than they have within the European Union. It was abundantly clear to me at that stage that we were in difficulty in the negotiations, not because we'd exercised our democratic right, but because we'd had the effrontery to decide that our future lay outside the European Union. Now, I think that it's very clear that our views of the European Union are very different from the views of the continuing 27. I think that that was always the case. I think that our history is such that we regarded the EU as an extension of the free trade principles that have impelled this country over the last couple of centuries. For the European Union, however, it is a totally different story. They are countries, by and large, that have been scarred by 2 conflicts in which some of them were occupied by some of the others. And frankly, so far as they're concerned, this is a jolly good way of avoiding further conflicts of that sort. It's a grand projet, and I think that you only need to read the speech that was delivered by President Macron of France last week in the Sorbonne to understand the trajectory of the European Union and the way that it is going. If you hadn't read it, and I'm very surprised, but if you haven't read it, let me just give you a flavour of what he says in that speech. He first of all identifies what he regards as a great evil, and that is the great evil that he calls sovereignism. Sovereignism. In other words, the ability to conduct your own affairs in your own country. Sovereignism. And he then went on to give his vision of this new Europe that he proposed to help build He wanted to see a European military intervention force, a European common defence budget, a European public prosecutor's office, a European civil protection force, a European border force, a European financial transaction tax, yes, that old chestnut again, and rather worryingly a thing he calls a European Agency for Disruptive Innovation, which sounds rather disruptive. It is a completely different vision. So the reason I want to mention that now is this. We have approached our negotiations with the European Union in the traditional British way. We've made our decision. We want to have good relations with our European neighbours, and we want those relations to be based upon the principles of free trade. For them, however, there are different objectives. They want, for example, to see the continuation of the single market, which is impossible, I believe, to be anything that's compatible with the vote to leave the European Union and the vote to control our own borders. They want to see a continuation of the customs union, which would make it impossible for us to strike our own free trade agreements around the world. And they want, again, to see the continuation of the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union in the United Kingdom. That's a court, I remind you, that has been known to strike down British Acts of Parliament.
Yes, absolutely.
I believe that we have made a very fair offer to the continuing European Union, and I know that my former colleague, my still colleague, David Davis, is working very hard to secure that deal. I think that the Prime Minister, in her speech in Florence a few days ago, set out a very, very fair position. She indicated that we were not wholly against making some further payment to the European Union. But, you know, I have these huge concerns.
Yeah.
There is a story of the Reverend Sidney Smith walking down a narrow street in London and seeing two women arguing from houses on the other side of the narrow road. And Smith said to his companion, you know, he said, those women will never agree. They're arguing from different premises. And I believe actually that the arguments that we are advancing in these negotiations are founded on different premises from those of the continuing European Union. So I think we should now make our position very clear. Owen has set out the position, I think, very clearly, and I think that we should reiterate it. We want to enter into a free trade agreement with the European Union. We're at a very sweet spot in our respective histories in that now our regulations are in total alignment. We haven't got to go through the sort of negotiations that the EU had to with Canada, for example, because there is nothing to agree. We're already there. But if, because through sheer doctrinaire politics, they regard our continued relationship of that sort to be inimical to them, then we must make it absolutely clear that we will terminate the negotiations, and that on the stroke of midnight, on the 29th of March 2019, we will leave.
Great.
Is the very firm message that the government now should be giving to the European Union. Talk to us, as you are required to under Article 50, about our future relationship, or do not be surprised that we stop talking to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that the size of the audience in this room is indicative of the fact that in this conference there is huge support for the proposition that we should now be making our position very clear. And I think that the clearest way to make our position is to reiterate and to repeat the title of this organisation. Leave does mean leave.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.